So let me point out just a few things here. And one is we've got to look at Israel, when we talk about these events, because the end times events will center around that little nation of Israel and the city of Jerusalem. So take Israel. Israel's the big one. And this is interesting. I just read this just recently. An Englishman named William Blackstone wrote a book, Jesus is Coming, in 1908. That was before Israel was a nation, And he says this in that book: Israel is God's sundial. If anyone desires to know our place in God's chronology, our position in the great march of events, look at Israel. There was no Israel when he wrote that. And so, but how true that is. Daniel 9:27 talks about just an event that'll be sort of a centerpiece in the whole end times. And in 9:27, he's prophesying the coming of the Messiah. He prophesies his death in chapter 9. And he goes on, he talks about the end of the age. And this is what he says about the end of the age. Then he shall make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week. Now the he in the context is this coming Antichrist. This incredible, great, unbelievable world leader, dictator if you would, that is just going to come charging onto the world stage and just absolutely amaze the entire world. And one thing he's going to do is he's going to make a covenant. He's going to make a treaty. He's going to make an agreement with, it says here, the many. That would definitely include at the center of Israel. And he says it'll be for 1 week. Now, he's not talking about a week of days. He's talking about, the Hebrew is one period of sevens. And we know, again, in the context and the way it's used in Daniel, it's a period of 7 years. So he's going to make this treaty with Israel, this covenant with Israel, a 7-year period. Now, what's interesting about that is for all of this to happen, Israel's got to be back in the land, and they've got to be there in unbelief. After all, they're making an agreement with the Antichrist, no less. And they will, according to that verse, they will have their temple and the sacrifices that were established in the Old Testament going on by the midpoint of that 7-year period, that 7-year agreement, because this guy is going to come on. Did I read the whole rest of it? And he says, no. But in the middle of the week, he will bring an end to sacrifice and offering. That's the temple and that's the sacrifices. And on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate, even until the consummation which is determined is poured out on the desolate. So this guy's going to come and he's going to desecrate the temple and stop the sacrifices at the midpoint. So there's got to be a temple and they've got to have their sacrifices in order. You know what's interesting about that whole thing? We don't have time to look at it, but Ezekiel chapter 36 talks about the reestablishment of Israel. And it says very clearly there that because of their unbelief, God's going to scatter them all over the world, which the Jews have been scattered all over the world. But he says at the very end, he's going to bring them back into their land that he gave Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And he promised Israel he's going to bring them back there. And that land, when they come back, is going to be a desolate land. It's going to be desolate. That's a historic fact. But when they come back into the land, he's going to bless and prosper them and make them fruitful in the land. And you know what else he says? He says when he gets them back in there, he's going to protect them himself. Need I say more? There's Israel, prosperous, unbelievably prosperous and fruitful, right in the land that God promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob 2000 BC. And these people who got scattered all over the world but kept their identity, which is an anthropological miracle, never happens. People get absorbed by other people. They disappear as a people. You don't have Hittites, Amorites, Moabites today, but you have Jews. And they're back in that land, and they're prospering, and God is protecting them. When they became an independent nation in 1948, the Arab world rose up and wanted to wipe them off, wipe them right into the Mediterranean Sea. Guess who won the War of Independence? Little old Israel won it against all odds. And then in 1967, there was the famous Six-Day War against the military might of Syria, Jordan, and Egypt. All together, little Israel in the middle of that, in 6 days knocked them all off. Retook Jerusalem, which is interesting. And then there was 1973, the War of Yom Kippur. Syria and Egypt got their military might and made a surprise attack on unexpecting Israel on the day of Yom Kippur. It would be like somebody attacking America on Christmas Day. Miraculously, Israel was able to mobilize themselves and push back these attacks. And finally, the world had to step in and said, ceasefire, ceasefire. Otherwise, Israel would have gone into Cairo and into Damascus. You know, there was this little Gaza war that took place a little while ago. And the Muslims in Gaza were shooting rockets into Israel. And Israel had what they call their Iron Dome, you know, their anti-rocket rockets, you know, trying to blast them away. There's an incident where one rocket was going right toward Tel Aviv, and Israel could not intercept it. And it was on its way down, and they knew this rocket's going to hit Tel Aviv dead center, and there's going to be a whole lot of carnage. And as it was coming down, a huge gust of wind from the east blew that rocket right into the Mediterranean Sea. And one of the commanders of the Israeli army saw that and said, there must be a God in Israel. You see these kinds of miraculous things. People ought to write a book about just, you know, what has gone on there in the protection of Israel. Ezekiel chapter 37 goes on. That's chapter 36. Chapter 37, this was, Ezekiel wrote in 700 BC. In chapter 37, Ezekiel has a vision of the valley of dry bones, you know. And in this vision, he sees this valley, and it's just filled with dry, dismembered bones. And God asked Ezekiel, can these bones live? Now, you know what we would say, but Ezekiel, he's a pretty smart cookie. His answer was, you know, Lord. And then in his vision, he said, speak of the prophesy to the bones. He began to prophesy these dry bones, and all of a sudden there's a great rattling going on, you know, and bones are coming together and everything, and they're making skeletons, and all of a sudden, you know, flesh is coming over them, and skin is coming over them, and there they are. There's flesh and bone. This mighty group, and he tells us in that chapter, that's Israel. But there's no breath in them. There's no life in them. And so he says, prophesy to them again, prophesy to the wind that the breath will come over them. And he prophesied again, and the wind, the breath, the spirit, would you, because it's the same word in the Hebrew, comes over them, and they come to life, an exceedingly great people and a great army. Brethren, this is exactly what we have now. We have Israel in the land. There they are, existing like nobody thought would ever happen again. But they're in unbelief. There's no spiritual life in them. And so you can go to Ezekiel chapter 37, I think it's verse 8, and you can say, we're right there. That's where we are today. So you've got the existence of the sovereign nation of Israel in the land of promise, and what's happening there is pointing that we're in the last days. And to enter into a peace agreement with the Antichrist shows Israel wants peace. And that's exactly where they're at, isn't it? They're crying for some way to bring peace in this area. Jesus said, when you see these things happening, look up, because your redemption is right at the doors.